Living alone in my grandparents' old Victorian house seemed like the perfect arrangement when I first moved in. After graduating college, I needed a place to stay while starting my new job, and my parents suggested I use the family house since it had been sitting empty for 2 years after my grandparents moved to assisted living. The property taxes were paid through a trust fund, so all I had to cover were utilities. It was a beautiful 3-story home built in the 1890s, with dark wood trim, stained glass windows, and more rooms than I knew what to do with. The first few weeks were uneventful as I settled into a routine. I chose the master bedroom on the 2nd floor as my room, using the adjacent study as my home office since I worked remotely 3 days a week. The house had its quirks: creaking floorboards, rattling pipes, and the occasional draft, but I grew accustomed to the sounds. What I couldn't get used to was how massive it felt being there alone. The 3rd floor remained completely unused, and I kept those rooms closed off to save on heating costs. I first noticed something was off when I couldn't find my favorite coffee mug one morning. I distinctly remembered washing it the night before and leaving it in the dish rack to dry. After searching the kitchen thoroughly, I found it in one of the upper cabinets, pushed to the very back behind some old plates. I figured I must have absent-mindedly put it away while half asleep. But then other small things started happening. A book from my nightstand would appear on the living room coffee table. My laptop charger would be plugged into a different outlet than where I left it. The bathroom hand towel would be slightly damp in the morning when I knew I hadn't used it since the previous evening. The incidents were so minor that I kept dismissing them until one night in October, about 3 months after moving in. I was working late in my study, headphones on, when I heard what sounded like footsteps above me. The sound was distinct enough to make me pull off my headphones and look up at the ceiling. The 3rd floor should have been completely empty. I sat perfectly still, listening, and heard it again. The unmistakable sound of someone walking across the floor above my head, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpeting but still audible in the silence of the house. My first instinct was to call the police, but I hesitated. What if I was just being paranoid? The house was old after all. But as I sat there debating, another sound made my blood run cold. The distinct creak of the 3rd floor stairs, as if someone was slowly descending them. I quickly turned off my desk lamp and moved away from the door, my hand shaking as I pulled out my phone. The footsteps continued down the stairs, slow and deliberate, each step making the old wood groan under their weight. I called 911 in a whispered panic, trying to explain the situation without making any noise. The operator told me officers were on their way and advised me to stay hidden. As I crouched in the dark corner of the study, I heard the footsteps reach the 2nd floor. They paused at the top of the stairs, and then, to my horror, began moving down the hallway toward the study. The floorboard outside my door creaked, and I saw the doorknob slowly begin to turn. Just then, I heard the distant sound of police sirens, and the doorknob stopped moving. The footsteps quickly retreated back down the hallway and up the stairs to the 3rd floor. I stayed frozen in place until I heard banging on the front door and officers announcing their presence. When they searched the house, they found evidence that made me sick to my stomach. In one of the unused 3rd floor bedrooms, they discovered signs that someone had been living there for months. There was a makeshift bed made from old cushions and blankets stolen from other rooms. They found food wrappers, empty water bottles, and most disturbingly, a collection of items from around my house. My missing socks, old mail, photos taken from frames, and even some of my unwashed clothes. The intruder had cut a small hole in the vents to spy on the floors below, explaining how they knew when I was home and where I was in the house. They had been watching me for months, learning my routines, and moving freely through my home while I slept. The police found entry marks on one of the 3rd floor windows that faced the large oak tree in the backyard. The intruder had been climbing the tree and entering through that window, which I had never bothered to check since I never went up there. They also discovered a notebook filled with detailed observations about my daily schedule, what times I showered, when I typically went to bed, and even what I ate for dinner each night. The level of surveillance was terrifying. Despite an extensive search of the area, they never caught the person. The police installed security cameras and alarms throughout the house, but I couldn't stay there knowing someone had been living above me, watching my every move for months. I moved out the next day, leaving most of my belongings behind. My parents sold the house 6 months later. Sometimes I drive past it and wonder if the new owners know what happened there, if they've checked their vents for holes, or if they've noticed small things moving around their house when no one else should be home. 2 years later, I received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a Polaroid photo of me sleeping in my bed at the old house, clearly taken from the vent in my bedroom ceiling. On the back was a handwritten note that said, "I miss watching you sleep." I moved to a different state the following week, and now live in a small single-story house with no attic, no vents large enough for anyone to crawl through, and security cameras covering every inch of the property. But I still check all my closets and lock doors multiple times each night, knowing that for months I shared my home with a stranger who knew everything about me, while I knew nothing about them. The first month at my new apartment was perfect. After 6 years of sharing spaces with roommates, I finally had a place all to myself, a modern one-bedroom unit in a recently renovated building downtown. The rent was steep, but my new remote position as a software developer made it affordable. I loved everything about it: the huge windows, the sleek appliances, and especially the peace and quiet of working from home. The only issue came up in early December when my heating unit started making strange clicking noises. I submitted a maintenance request through the building's online portal, and they scheduled a technician to come by the next morning. The guy who showed up seemed professional enough. He wore a company uniform, carried proper ID, and knew exactly what he was doing. He spent about an hour fixing the unit, making small talk about the weather while he worked. I remember thinking he was almost too chatty, asking lots of questions about my work schedule and whether I lived alone. A few days after his visit, I noticed small things out of place in my apartment. At first, it was just minor details. A coffee mug turned a different direction, my laptop charger moved to another outlet, the bathroom hand soap dispenser suddenly fuller than I remembered. I blamed it on stress and lack of sleep from my recent project deadlines. Then one morning, I found crumbs on my kitchen counter when I was sure I'd wiped it clean before bed. That same day, the throw pillows on my couch were arranged differently than how I always kept them. My brother suggested installing some security cameras after I mentioned these odd occurrences during our weekly video chat. I bought a set of small wireless cameras that connected to my phone, placing them strategically around the apartment, one facing the front door, another in the living room, and a third covering the kitchen and dining area. I felt a bit paranoid setting them up, but I figured it would at least give me peace of mind. For the next week, nothing unusual appeared on the footage. I started to think I'd been imagining things until one night, around 3 a.m., my phone lit up with a motion alert from the front door camera. Half asleep, I opened the app and felt my heart stop. The maintenance technician was at my door, silently inserting a key into the lock. I watched in horror as he carefully opened the door, checked the hallway, and slipped inside my apartment. The living room camera showed him moving through my apartment with practiced familiarity, using his phone's flashlight to navigate. He walked directly to my kitchen, opened the fridge, and helped himself to my leftovers. The casual way he moved through my space made it clear this wasn't his first visit. He knew exactly where everything was, which cabinet held the glasses, which drawer had the silverware. I lay frozen in my bed, watching through my phone as this stranger made himself at home. The footage showed him spending nearly an hour in my apartment. After eating, he wandered around looking at my things, sitting on my couch, and even using my bathroom. The most disturbing part was when he approached my closed bedroom door. He stood there for several minutes, his hand on the doorknob, before finally deciding not to open it. I silently thanked myself for always sleeping with my bedroom door locked. While he was still in my apartment, I called 911 with shaking hands and whispered my situation to the dispatcher. They told me to stay in my bedroom with the door locked until officers arrived. I watched on my phone as he suddenly became alert, probably hearing the approaching sirens. He quickly put everything back in place and slipped out the front door, careful to lock it behind him as if he'd never been there. The police arrived minutes later, and I showed them the security footage. They were disturbed by how comfortable he seemed in my space and how methodically he'd covered his tracks. When they reviewed my building's hallway cameras, they discovered he'd been entering my apartment almost every night for the past 2 weeks, always between 2 and 4 a.m. He must have made a copy of my key during the maintenance visit, taking advantage of the few minutes I'd stepped away to answer a work call. They arrested him at his home the next day. The police search revealed a disturbing collection of items from various apartments he'd serviced: keys, personal items, and photographs of residents, including several of me. He had detailed notes about my schedule, what food I bought, which shows I watched, and even logs of my phone conversations he'd overheard while in my apartment. There were also recordings he'd made while walking around my place at night, narrating his observations about my life in unsettling detail. The investigation uncovered that he'd been doing this for years, targeting dozens of single women living alone in the buildings where he worked. He'd use maintenance requests as opportunities to copy keys and gather information about residents. My security cameras were the first time anyone had caught him in the act. The property management company faced a massive lawsuit for failing to run proper background checks and immediately changed their entire maintenance staff and security protocols. I broke my lease and moved out the next day, unable to stay in that apartment knowing he'd been there so many times while I slept. I now live in a house with a top-of-the-line security system and cameras covering every angle. I still work remotely, but I never let service workers into my home unless I have someone else present. Sometimes I wake up at night thinking I hear someone moving around my house, and I have to check my security cameras to convince myself I'm really alone. The hardest part is knowing that for 2 weeks, I was never actually alone in my apartment. I just thought I was. My parents' work schedules meant I spent a lot of time alone at our house after school. Dad worked second shift at the factory, and Mom was usually at the hospital until late, doing overtime as a nurse. Being 16, I was perfectly capable of taking care of myself for a few hours. Our house was in a good neighborhood, the kind where people left their doors unlocked during the day, though my parents always insisted on proper security. The routine was always the same: come home from school, grab a snack, do homework, and then relax until someone got home. Our house had this weird layout where the main bathroom was at the end of a long hallway on the second floor. The hallway had no windows, just family photos lining both walls. I always felt uneasy walking down that hallway at night, like the eyes in the photos were following me. One Wednesday in October, I came home from track practice later than usual. The house was already dark when I arrived, and the autumn chill had settled in. After finishing my homework, I decided to take a hot shower to warm up. It was around 7 p.m., and both my parents wouldn't be home for hours. I locked the front door, checked all the windows downstairs like always, and headed up to the bathroom. The bathroom had this huge mirror above the sink that faced the shower. The previous owners had installed one of those fancy rainfall shower heads that made showering feel like standing in warm rain. I turned the water as hot as I could stand it, and soon the small room filled with steam. The mirror completely fogged up, turning into a blank white canvas of condensation. About halfway through my shower, I noticed something odd. Through the shower's glass door, I could see the mirror starting to reveal something in the steam. At first, I thought it was just water running down, making natural patterns. But as I looked closer, my blood ran cold. There were handprints appearing in the condensation, as if someone had pressed their hands against the mirror while it was fogged up. I froze, the hot water still running down my back. The handprints hadn't been there when I started my shower. I would have noticed them while brushing my hair at the sink. These appeared while I was showering, which meant someone had been in the bathroom with me, watching through the steam. The thought made me sick to my stomach. My first instinct was to turn off the water and run, but I forced myself to stay calm. If someone was still in the bathroom, sudden movements might provoke them. I could see the bathroom door through the foggy shower glass. It was closed, just as I'd left it. I tried to remember if I'd locked it. It was a habit I'd developed living with family, but had I done it this time? Trying to act normal, I turned off the water and quickly grabbed my towel through the slight gap in the shower door. As I dried off inside the shower stall, I heard a floorboard creak in the hallway outside. Someone was out there. I wrapped the towel around myself and grabbed my phone from the counter where I'd left it. The sound of another footstep in the hallway made me jump. I called 911, whispering my situation to the dispatcher. They told me to stay put and lock the bathroom door if I hadn't already. When I reached for the lock, I noticed something that made my heart stop. The lock was broken, with small scratch marks around it suggesting someone had tampered with it. The footsteps in the hallway grew closer. Panic taking over, I wedged myself between the toilet and the wall, trying to make myself as small as possible. The bathroom door slowly began to open. Through the remaining steam, I could see a shadow in the doorway. Just then, police sirens blared in the distance, and the shadow quickly disappeared. I heard rapid footsteps going down the stairs and the sound of our back door slamming. The police arrived minutes later. They found a ladder propped against the house near my parents' bedroom window, which had been jimmied open. The intruder had been in our house the entire time I was home. Security cameras from our neighbor's house showed a man entering through that window shortly after I got home from track practice. He had been watching me for hours, waiting for me to take a shower. The investigation revealed more disturbing details. They found a hidden camera installed in the bathroom vent, positioned to record the shower. In my parents' room, they discovered cigarette butts and food wrappers stuffed under the bed, suggesting he'd been entering our house regularly while we were out. Most disturbing of all, they found a notebook filled with detailed descriptions of my daily routine, including what time I usually showered and when I was home alone. They never caught him. The fingerprints from the mirror and the bathroom door didn't match any in their database. The camera contained weeks of footage, but he wore gloves and a mask in the clips of him installing it. We moved away the following month, but I still can't take showers when I'm home alone. I always check the vents for cameras and wipe away any steam on mirrors immediately. Sometimes when the bathroom gets steamy, I swear I can see handprints starting to appear, even though I know it's just my imagination. My sleeping issues started right after I moved into the Cedar Grove apartments. The building was relatively new, built in the last 5 years, with modern amenities and security features that made it appealing for someone living alone. I chose a third-floor unit, figuring it would be safer than the ground floor. The rent was reasonable for what I got, a spacious one-bedroom with high ceilings and large windows that let in plenty of natural light. Every night since moving in, I'd wake up at exactly 3:27 a.m. Not approximately, exactly. The first few times, I blamed it on the new environment and unfamiliar sounds. But after 2 weeks of the same precise wake-up time, I started to wonder if something in the building's systems was causing it. Maybe a mechanical noise or power surge I wasn't consciously registering. I mentioned it to the building manager, who checked the maintenance schedules, but found nothing running at that time. He suggested it might be the heating system cycling, though that didn't explain the precise timing. I bought a white noise machine, tried sleeping with earplugs, and even took melatonin, but nothing changed. Every night, 3:27 a.m., my eyes would snap open, heart racing for no apparent reason. After a month of this, I started noticing other odd things. My coffee maker would be in a slightly different position than where I'd left it. The bathroom towel would be damp in the morning when I hadn't showered the night before. The TV remote would be on the other side of the coffee table. Small things that were easy to dismiss, but started adding up. Then came the morning that changed everything. I woke up to my alarm at 7 a.m., having experienced my usual 3:27 a.m. awakening a few hours earlier. I shuffled to the kitchen to start the coffee maker, and that's when I saw them. Scattered across my kitchen counter were dozens of Polaroid photographs. My hand shook as I picked up the first one. It was a photo of me, sleeping in my bed, taken from the doorway of my bedroom. Each photo showed me sleeping from a different angle, from the doorway, from beside the bed, from the foot of the bed, even from directly above. They were all taken on different nights. I could tell from my changing sleeping positions in different pajamas. The most recent ones were from last night. In one photo, my eyes were open. It was time-stamped 3:27 a.m. The realization hit me. I wasn't randomly waking up. Something was waking me up. With trembling hands, I called the police. While waiting for them to arrive, I noticed something else. Small circular marks on my bedroom ceiling. Looking closer, I discovered nearly invisible fishing line hanging down with small hooks at the ends. Someone had been suspending a camera above my bed while I slept. The intricate setup explained the photos taken from above. The police investigation revealed more horrifying details. They found a sophisticated lock-picking kit hidden behind a loose panel in my hallway. The building's security footage showed nothing unusual, no one entering or leaving my apartment at strange hours. But when they checked the ventilation system, they found a network of small cameras hidden in the vents throughout my apartment, all wirelessly connected to transmit footage somewhere off-site. The most disturbing discovery came when they lifted my mattress. Taped to the bottom was a small device that emitted a high-frequency sound at exactly 3:27 a.m. every night, designed to wake me up just enough to open my eyes for the photos, but not enough to fully gain consciousness. The level of planning was terrifying. This wasn't random. I had been specifically chosen and meticulously stalked. The investigation expanded to the entire building. They found similar camera setups in 3 other apartments, all occupied by single women. The cameras were all connected to the same wireless network, but the signal was bounced through so many proxies that they couldn't trace its destination. The building's maintenance records showed no recent work done in any of the targeted apartments that could explain when the cameras were installed. I moved out that same day, leaving most of my furniture behind. The other targeted residents did the same. The building management offered to release us all from our leases without penalty, probably to avoid lawsuits. They also hired a security company to sweep every apartment in the building for cameras and other devices. The story made local news, which led to similar discoveries in other apartment complexes across the city. 6 months later, I received an envelope in the mail at my new address. Inside was a single Polaroid photo of me sleeping in my new bedroom. On the back was written 3:27 a.m. always works. I moved again the next day, this time to a different state. I now sleep with my bedroom lights on and cameras recording 24/7. But every night, no matter where I am or what precautions I take, I still wake up at exactly 3:27 a.m., wondering if someone is watching me through my closed eyes. Working as a data analyst for a tech startup had its perks. The pay was great, and the fully remote position meant I could live anywhere with decent internet. I chose a small cabin-style house just outside of Burlington, Vermont, away from the city noise but close enough to civilization. My workspace was a converted sunroom that offered a perfect view of the surrounding pine forest. The issue started during a routine system check. I was reviewing my computer's activity logs, something I did monthly as part of my cybersecurity routine. Being in tech made me more paranoid than most about digital security. That's when I noticed something odd in the application access history. My webcam had been activated at 2:14 a.m. last Tuesday, running for exactly 47 minutes. I initially dismissed it as a software glitch. Webcams sometimes activated during system updates or when certain applications ran their diagnostics. But something made me dig deeper into the logs. The webcam had been accessed multiple times over the past month, always between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., always when I was asleep upstairs. Each session lasted exactly 47 minutes. The timestamps revealed a pattern, every Tuesday and Friday night, like clockwork. The access logs showed the webcam activating remotely through my virtual private network connection. Someone had found a way to bypass my company's VPN security protocols. As I dug through the system files, I discovered something even more disturbing. The activation coincided with my microphone turning on too. I reported it to our IT security team immediately. They suggested I check my recent network connections for any unauthorized devices. The list showed my usual devices: laptop, phone, tablet, smart TV, but there was one I didn't recognize. A device labeled only as Node 23 had been connecting to my network every night for weeks, always minutes before the webcam activated. Going through my archived work files, I found dozens of recorded video sessions I hadn't created. Each was exactly 47 minutes long, showing my empty office at night. The camera angle changed slightly in each video, as if someone was remotely adjusting it to scan different parts of the room. But it was the audio that made my skin crawl. The microphone had picked up the sound of me walking around upstairs, talking on the phone, even snoring in my sleep. Our cybersecurity team traced the intrusion to a sophisticated botnet operation. Someone was using hijacked computers worldwide to mask their actual location while accessing my system. They'd exploited a vulnerability in our company's VPN to gain access to employees' home networks. I wasn't the only target. Dozens of remote workers had been compromised. The investigation revealed the hacker had been scanning my home network for other vulnerable devices. They'd accessed my smart TV's built-in camera, my security system's video feed, and even tried to activate my phone's camera. The 47-minute duration wasn't random. It was the exact time needed for their software to map my daily movements through the house, using audio cues, and create a detailed profile of my habits. The company provided all affected employees with new computers and advanced security systems. They also hired experts to sweep our homes for compromised devices. In my office, they found a wireless signal repeater hidden inside my printer. Someone had physically planted it there to strengthen their connection to my network. The device's purchase history led to a former IT contractor who had done work for our company. The contractor had been secretly selling remote access to employees' home networks on the dark web. The buyers were mostly cybercriminals looking to steal corporate data, but some had more sinister motives. One buyer had purchased access to only female employees' networks, specifically requesting webcam and microphone control. The FBI found thousands of recorded videos on his devices when they arrested him. Now I work from a completely rebuilt home office with military-grade network security. My computer's webcam and microphone are physically disconnected when not in use, and I run hourly security scans on all my devices. But sometimes, late at night, I still check my system logs, watching for that familiar 47-minute pattern. And every Tuesday and Friday at 2:14 a.m., I find myself wide awake, staring at my computer's dark webcam lens, wondering if someone is trying to look back through it. The flu hit me hard that week in January. After 3 days of fever and body aches, my doctor prescribed bed rest and plenty of fluids. Living alone made being sick even worse. No one to make soup or check on me. My small ranch house felt especially isolated during winter, with most neighbors gone south for the season. Only the Hendersons stayed year-round in the house across the street. I spent most of Tuesday in bed, drifting in and out of fever-induced sleep. The medication made everything hazy. My bedroom faced the street, but I kept the curtains drawn against the winter glare. Around midnight, my phone rang, jolting me awake. It was Mrs. Henderson, my elderly neighbor from across the street. "Dear, are you all right?" Her voice carried that concerned tone unique to grandmothers. "You've been standing at your living room window for hours. George and I are worried. You haven't moved at all." I sat up in bed, confused. My living room was at the other end of the house. There was no way she could have seen me there. I hadn't left my bedroom all day. "Mrs. Henderson," I croaked through my sore throat. "I've been in bed all day with the flu. I haven't been near the living room window." The line went quiet for a moment. Then she spoke, her voice trembling slightly. "Dear, I'm looking at your window right now. You're standing there in that red sweater you always wear. You've been completely still for at least 3 hours." My heart started racing, fever forgotten. I did own a red sweater, but it was packed away in my closet. Still on the phone, I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under my bed and slowly made my way down the hallway toward the living room. The hardwood floors creaked under my feet despite my attempts to move silently. "They're moving," Mrs. Henderson suddenly exclaimed. "They just turned around." I froze in the hallway. "What are they doing?" I whispered. "Walking away from the window," she replied. "Very slowly. Still haven't moved their arms at all. It's so strange, like they're gliding." I heard George in the background saying he was calling the police. I gripped the bat tighter and entered the living room. It was empty, but the curtains were open. I always kept them closed in winter. As I moved closer to the window, I noticed something on the floor. My red sweater was laid out flat, as if someone had been wearing it but suddenly vanished, leaving it to collapse in a perfect outline of a person. The police arrived quickly. They found no signs of forced entry, but discovered all the other curtains in my house had been opened. Outside, in the snow beneath each window, they found single footprints. Just one print per window, perfectly formed, as if someone had stood in each spot without moving. The prints were barefoot, despite the freezing temperature. The security cameras from the Hendersons' house showed something that made no sense. In the footage, a figure in my red sweater stood motionless at my living room window for exactly 3 hours and 17 minutes. But when the figure turned around, the sweater appeared empty, as if no one was wearing it. The cameras showed it moving away from the window with an unnatural floating motion before the footage abruptly cut out. They brought in forensics experts who found something disturbing. The footprints in the snow contained trace elements of mercury and other compounds that made no sense in this context. More bizarrely, high-speed analysis of the security footage showed that the figure never blinked or breathed. There was no condensation on the window despite the cold, no subtle movements that all living things make. I stayed with my parents until the investigation concluded. They found no explanation for what happened. When I finally returned home, I threw away the red sweater and installed blackout curtains on every window. Sometimes, late at night, I'll get a call from Mrs. Henderson. She never says anything anymore. I just hear her shaky breathing. Then I'll look out my bedroom window and see a figure standing motionless at her living room window, wearing what looks like my old red sweater. The charming 1960s split level caught my eye the moment it hit the market. As a first-time homebuyer, I was drawn to its retro character, the wood paneling, vintage light fixtures, and especially the built-in photo alcove in the living room. The previous owner, an elderly woman named Ruth Miller, had left it pristine. The selling price was surprisingly low because she'd moved into assisted living and her son wanted a quick sale. I spent the first weekend making the space my own, unpacking boxes and arranging furniture. The photo alcove became my project, carefully placing framed pictures from my childhood, family gatherings, and college years along its built-in shelves. Something about displaying my life's timeline in that dedicated space felt right, like I was officially marking this house as mine. 3 weeks after moving in, I noticed something odd about the photos. The frame holding my 5th birthday party picture showed a different scene. A young girl in a similar party dress, but it wasn't me. The cake, decorations, and setting were completely unfamiliar. I figured I must have mixed up the photos while cleaning, though I couldn't find my original anywhere. Over the next few days, more photos changed. My high school graduation became another girl's graduation. My family beach vacation transformed into this stranger's beach trip. Each new photo matched the theme and approximate year of my original, but featured this unknown girl growing up. The frames were the same ones I'd bought, but the contents had been meticulously swapped. I started noticing other subtle changes around the house. The vintage tea kettle I'd inherited from my grandmother disappeared, replaced by a similar but different one. The wind chimes I'd hung on the back porch were now a different style. My welcome mat had been swapped for one that looked decades old. Each replacement had a worn, lived-in quality that made them seem like they'd always been there. Concerned, I contacted the realtor who'd handled the sale. She revealed that Ruth Miller had lived in the house for over 50 years before moving to assisted living. When I described the girl in the new photos, the realtor went quiet. "That sounds like Ruth's granddaughter, Alice," she said. "She grew up visiting that house, tragically died in a car accident 10 years ago at just 23. Ruth was never the same after that." I installed security cameras that weekend. The footage showed something impossible. Each night around midnight, objects would simply change. There was no sign of anyone entering, no evidence of tampering. The cameras just showed static for a split second, and when the image returned, something would be different. It was as if the house itself was rejecting my memories and replacing them with its own. A locksmith discovered that the house's locks had been subtly altered, tiny scratches and wear patterns suggesting someone had been using old keys. But the security footage never showed anyone entering. He replaced all the locks, but the changes continued. More photos appeared. Alice's prom, her college graduation, events that had happened in parallel with my own life, but in this very house. I finally visited Ruth at her assisted living facility, bringing one of the mysterious photos. The nurse said Ruth hadn't spoken in months, but when I showed her the picture, she became agitated. "The house remembers," she kept saying. "Alice's memories are in the walls. They'll push everything else out until she's home again." The nurse quickly led me out as Ruth became increasingly distraught. That night, I packed up everything that hadn't been changed and left. The realtor found a new buyer within days. Another young woman, similar in age to what Alice would have been. A month later, I drove by out of curiosity. Through the living room window, I could see the photo alcove. It was filled with pictures of Alice at every age, as if she'd never left. In one of the frames, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. A recent-looking photo of Alice, aged to her 30s, standing in front of the house. She was wearing the exact outfit I had on that day. Adopting Shadow from the shelter felt like the right decision for my new lifestyle. After the divorce, the little craftsman bungalow I'd bought felt too quiet, too empty. The elderly black cat was exactly what I needed, independent enough to handle my long work hours, but affectionate when it counted. The shelter mentioned he'd been found as a stray, living in the walls of an abandoned house. Shadow settled in quickly, mapping out his favorite spots in the house. He especially loved the kitchen cabinet under the sink, often pawing at the back panel for hours. I assumed he could smell mice, though I'd never seen any evidence of them. The home inspector hadn't mentioned any pest issues, but the house was over 80 years old enough to have its secrets. The first strange item appeared on my bedroom doorstep, a small silver charm bracelet, tarnished with age. I assumed Shadow had found it in some corner of the house, though I didn't recognize it from my initial deep cleaning. Cats bring gifts, I thought, and tucked it away in my jewelry box. But then more items started appearing, each more peculiar than the last. A child's diary key, its brass surface green with oxidation. A single pearl earring caked with dust. A collection of old buttons, some still attached to scraps of fabric. A plastic barrette with faded flowers. Each morning brought new discoveries, always placed carefully at my bedroom door. Shadow seemed immensely proud of each gift, purring and rubbing against my legs as I examined them. I started documenting the items, curious about their origin. They all seemed to belong to a young girl, probably from the 1950s or 60s based on their style. The diary key particularly intrigued me. Where was the diary it belonged to? I tried following Shadow when he went hunting for treasures, but he always disappeared into that cabinet under the sink, somehow squeezing past the pipes where I couldn't follow. One evening, I decided to investigate the cabinet properly. After removing everything from under the sink, I noticed something odd about the back panel. The edges didn't quite meet the wall, and there was a slight draft coming through. When I pressed on it, the entire panel shifted, revealing a narrow gap behind it. My flashlight beam showed a small tunnel extending into darkness. I called my contractor friend over to investigate. He discovered that the house had a previously sealed crawl space between the walls, probably from an old renovation. It ran behind several rooms, creating a narrow passage barely wide enough for maintenance access. Shadow had somehow found a way in through the cabinet and had been exploring these hidden passages. We followed the passage, finding Shadow's collection point, a small alcove where two walls met. The space was filled with dozens more items: old toys, hair ribbons, costume jewelry, and finally, the diary that matched the key. The leather-bound book was weather-damaged but still readable. Inside, a name, property of Lucy Wheeler, 1964. Research at the local library revealed that the Wheeler family had lived in my house during the 1960s. Their daughter Lucy disappeared without a trace in 1964, just shy of her 13th birthday. The case was never solved. The items Shadow had been bringing me were Lucy's possessions, somehow preserved in that hidden space for over 50 years. Most unsettling was Lucy's final diary entry, dated the day she vanished. She wrote about hearing noises in the walls at night, scratching sounds that seemed to follow her from room to room. She'd blamed rats, but mentioned something strange. Every time she heard the sounds, her belongings would go missing, only to reappear in different parts of the house. The police reopened Lucy's case, but the crawl space revealed no further clues to her disappearance. Shadow still brings me things sometimes. Old marbles, hairpins, small toys, but I don't know where he's finding them. I've sealed every entrance to the crawl space I could find, yet he somehow gets in. At night, I hear him moving through the walls, and sometimes, just sometimes, I hear what sounds like a young girl's laughter following him through the darkness. My grandmother's death hit our family hard. She'd lived in her modest two-story colonial for over 50 years, filling it with memories and countless family photographs. Being the only relative still in Massachusetts, I inherited the house and the responsibility of sorting through decades of her life. The first week was spent just organizing photos, hundreds of them, spanning multiple generations of our family. I decided to preserve her photo wall in the front hallway exactly as she'd had it. The display started with her wedding photo from 1952 and chronicled our family through the decades. Births, graduations, holidays, reunions. It took me 2 days to carefully dust each frame and make sure they were perfectly level. I remembered every photo from years of visiting, having spent countless hours studying them as a child. The change was so subtle, I almost missed it. I was walking past the wall one morning when something caught my eye about my parents' wedding photo. In the background, partially visible behind a flower arrangement, was a dark figure I'd never noticed before. The image was slightly blurry in that spot, but it looked like someone in a dark suit, standing perfectly still, facing the camera. I pulled the frame down to examine it closer. The figure was definitely there, but something felt wrong about it. The photo paper in that spot felt different, slightly raised, as if that section had been altered. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the digital copy I'd taken during cataloging the week before. My hands started shaking. In the digital version, there was no figure behind the flowers. Once I noticed the first one, I started seeing more. My high school graduation photo now showed the same dark figure standing in the doorway behind the group. In my sister's wedding photo, it was barely visible through a window. My nephew's christening, my cousin's piano recital, our family reunion at the lake. The figure appeared in every photo, always partially obscured but unmistakably present. I spent hours comparing the altered photos to my digital copies. The figure had been added to every single photograph on the wall sometime in the past week. The alterations were skillful, matching the grain and aging of each photo perfectly. But it wasn't just paper photographs. When I checked the reflection of the photo wall in the hallway mirror, the figure was even more prominent in the reflections, closer to the foreground in each scene. I called a photo restoration expert to examine the pictures. He was baffled by the alterations, saying they didn't match any known technique. The changes weren't on the surface of the photos, they seemed to go all the way through the paper. When he took a photo of one of the altered pictures, the figure appeared even closer to the foreground in his new photo, as if it was slowly moving forward through the layers of time captured on film. Things escalated when I found my grandmother's old photo albums in the attic. Every photograph that showed the house's interior now contained the figure, standing progressively closer to the camera in photos taken more recently. In the earliest photos from the 1950s, it was just a dark shape in the distant background. By the 1990s photos, you could make out a suit and tie, though the face remained shadowed. I took all the photos down and locked them in the attic, but each morning they reappeared on the wall, the figure even closer in each one. I started avoiding the hallway, using the back stairs instead. Then yesterday, looking through recent photos on my phone, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In a selfie I'd taken in the hallway mirror last week, the figure was standing right behind me. Its previously shadowed face now clear and recognizable. It was my grandmother, wearing the dark suit we'd buried her in. This morning, I couldn't find any of the original photos. Every frame on the wall now shows the same image, my grandmother in her dark suit, standing at the center of our empty hallway, staring directly at the camera. The timestamps on the photos read tomorrow's date. I'm packing my bags right now, but I know it's too late. When I look in the hallway mirror, I can see her standing behind me, closer than in any photograph, reaching out with hands that cast no reflection. Moving into my first apartment after culinary school felt like a dream come true. The kitchen was what sold me on the place. Professional-grade appliances, granite countertops, and enough space to actually work. The previous tenant had been a chef too, which explained the high-end renovations. I'd spent years building my knife collection, investing in top-quality Japanese steel that I treated better than most people treat their cars. After arranging my knife block just so, with each blade positioned exactly as I liked it, I settled into a routine. Work at the restaurant until late, come home to experiment with new recipes, clean everything meticulously, then bed. I was obsessive about my knives. They were always cleaned, dried, and returned to their specific slots in the block, handles aligned precisely. Every chef has their quirks about their tools. The first irregularity was subtle. One morning, my Santoku knife was angled slightly differently in its slot. Most people wouldn't notice, but I knew exactly how I'd left it. I checked the blade. It was clean, but something felt off about it. Under bright light, I noticed microscopic spots along the edge that looked like copper residue. I assumed I must have missed something while cleaning it the night before. Then my bread knife was out of alignment, with similar spots near the serrated edge. The next day, my chef's knife had the same marks. I became paranoid about cleaning them, using professional-grade sanitizer and examining each blade under a magnifying glass. But every morning, at least one knife would be slightly moved, with those strange copper-colored specks that I now suspected weren't copper at all. I set up a small motion-activated camera focused on the knife block. The first night's footage showed nothing unusual. The second night, at 3:14 a.m., the video suddenly went dark for exactly 7 minutes. When the image returned, my paring knife was in a different position. This happened 3 more nights. Different knives, same 7-minute blackout, always at 3:14 a.m. I started hearing strange sounds at night, not from my apartment, but from the walls. A rhythmic scraping that reminded me of knife sharpening, but deeper inside the building. Sometimes there were softer sounds too, like something being cut. I mentioned it to my downstairs neighbor, but she said she hadn't heard anything. Though she did mention her cat had been acting strange lately, staring at the walls and hissing at nothing. The building manager was useless, claiming the sounds were just old pipes. But he did let slip something interesting. The previous tenant, the chef who'd renovated the kitchen, hadn't exactly moved out. He disappeared 6 months ago, leaving everything behind. The police investigation found nothing, and eventually his family had cleared out the apartment. I called a plumber about the wall sounds. He opened up the kitchen wall to check the pipes and found something disturbing. All the walls had been modified. The spaces between studs had been widened, creating narrow passages through the building's infrastructure. Some of the metal pipes showed scratch marks that looked like they'd been made by extremely sharp blades. The police came back to investigate. Behind the walls, they found evidence of someone living in the building's infrastructure. Food wrappers, water bottles, and disturbingly, small bottles of metal polish and sharpening stones. They also discovered traces of blood in various places, but not enough to suggest anything fatal. The DNA matched multiple missing pets from the building. They never found the previous tenant. The case went cold after a few weeks. I moved out immediately, leaving my knife block behind. My new place has all cheap knives that I don't care about. But sometimes, when I'm working late at the restaurant, I notice our kitchen knives slightly out of place in the morning, with those same copper-colored specks along their edges. And last week, one of our line cooks mentioned hearing scraping sounds in the walls after midnight. The first package arrived 3 days after I moved into my studio apartment. Brown cardboard, Amazon Prime tape, addressed to me, but I hadn't ordered anything. Inside was a travel-sized white noise machine. I almost threw it away, thinking it was a marketing promotion, until I remembered the phone conversation I'd had with my mom the night before about having trouble sleeping in the noisy downtown area. 2 days later, another package arrived, this time containing gourmet coffee beans from a local roaster. Again, I hadn't ordered them. The brand was the exact one I'd mentioned wanting to try while talking to myself in the kitchen that morning. I checked my credit card statements and Amazon account history. No charges, no orders. The shipping label had my name spelled perfectly, including my middle initial that I rarely used. The packages kept coming, each containing items related to things I'd discussed, or even just thought out loud about in my apartment. The novel I'd mentioned wanting to read while on the phone with my sister. The specific brand of yoga mat I'd looked up on my laptop. The exact shade of nail polish I'd complained about not being able to find anywhere. Every delivery was from a different store, but they all arrived through various legitimate courier services. I became paranoid about speaking in my apartment. I searched for hidden microphones but found nothing. I changed all my passwords, ran virus scans, and even had my phone checked for spyware. Everything came back clean. Yet the deliveries continued, becoming more personal and specific. A framed photo of my childhood dog that I described to a friend over the phone. Sheet music for a song I'd hummed while doing dishes. The building manager was no help, insisting that if the packages were properly addressed and delivered, there was nothing suspicious about them. I started recording everything that arrived, documenting times and dates. The pattern was clear. Within 48 hours of mentioning wanting or needing something, it would arrive at my door. I never saw who delivered them. They always came while I was at work. Things escalated when I started receiving items I'd only thought about, never spoken aloud. The specific telephone anxiety medication I'd been considering asking my doctor about. The rare book about local history I'd only looked up on my work computer. A spare key to my parents' house that I'd been meaning to get copied. Each item came with a packing slip showing it was paid for in cash at various local stores. I set up a delivery camera, but every time a package arrived, the footage would show static for exactly 90 seconds. When the image returned, the package would be sitting there, as if materialized from thin air. I started refusing deliveries, marking them returned to sender, but they kept coming back, always with a note: special delivery for valued customer, no returns accepted. The final straw came when I received a package containing my exact outfit from that day. Clothes I was currently wearing, down to the same size and brands, still with store tags attached. The packing slip showed they'd been purchased that morning, hours before I'd chosen my outfit. I finally called the police. The investigation revealed something chilling. Every store the items came from had security footage of the purchases being made by someone who looked exactly like me. Same height, build, hair, even the same way of walking. But in each video, their face was always just slightly turned away from the cameras, as if they knew exactly where the blind spots were. The timestamps showed these purchases happening while I was at work, verified by my office's security system. I moved out that weekend, leaving no forwarding address. But yesterday, at my new place 3 states away, a package arrived. Inside was a photo of me packing to leave my old apartment, taken from inside my closet, with a note written on the back: "Don't worry about updating your address. I'll always know where to deliver your packages." The photo was printed on paper from the same brand of printer I'd been thinking about buying for my new home office.